Hello and welcome to Two Girls in a Pod. I'm Sharon.
I'm Christy.
Welcome, everyone. And today we would like to welcome a guest. We ran into at Estes Park while we were there doing the Squatch festival. So got to talking and really liked your story. So we thought, you know what, let's talk about it. So
we would like to welcome Lori Wade.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
Good. So real quickly, because where do you live at?
I'm in Ooltewah, Tennessee, which means owl's nest in Cherokee.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
So I'm guessing that's not a big place.
It's not a small place, but it's not a big place. I mean, I grew up in the country, so it's big to me.
Okay.
It's
so
just outside Chattanooga, if that helps.
Okay.
Very good. So one of the things is you do the squatching, you kind of get out and do that kind of stuff. What do you do when you're not doing that?
What do I not do? I have my own business called Absolute Belt Supply, and I sell industrial supplies and conveyor belts to people. It's typically a man's world job, and it's only me, but I've been doing that for 17 years now. Wow. That's my small business, and currently I have 3 grandchildren, and by the end of the month, I'll have a 4th grandchild.
Oh, congratulations.
I've been married 38 years to my high school sweetheart, and I have 2 adult children that are living and 1 child that has passed in 2019.
Okay. I'm a little curious. How on earth did you get into conveyor belts? Because you're right, that's very much a man.
I know, it's kind of a strange thing. I used to live in Wetumpka, Alabama, and I worked for a guy doing his payables. It was a home family business, and he was very ADD. I love him dearly, but he was very ADD, and he would never follow up on his customers, or, a customer would call and say, hey, I need my conveyor belt. And he'd look at me and go, I haven't ordered it yet, So I kind of started doing both ends of it for him. And then when I moved to Tennessee, I worked for him for a little while. And then he called one day and said, I'm going to close the business and do something different. And I said, I can do this. And I opened my own business and started doing this. And, went out and got some new customers, kept a couple of his old customers. And that's what I did. Luckily, my husband has a good job.
Well, do you find that was that difficult for you? Because when you're going to these men and saying you're going to sell,
yes, because it is typically a man's world. I mean, women are moving forward in that aspect, but I specifically remember one time that I got called to this business, and he said, I need you to come down here. And it was about 2 hours away. He said, I need you to come down here. One of my machines is broke. And I panicked, and I went down, and I'm looking at it. And he said, it does this, 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 this. And I thought, I'm in big trouble because I have no idea. And I looked at him, and I told him, I said, look, yes, this is my company, but I have no idea what this is or what the problem is, but I can find somebody and have them here tomorrow to look at. And he looked at me, he said, you came down here knowing you didn't know that. And I said, yes, I did. And he said, well, I respect you for that. And you were honest with me. And I'm like, yes, but I don't even know what you're talking about. and I ended up selling him a piece of product because I knew somebody that could go look at it and knew what they were talking about. But typically now they know what they want. And I'm more or less a middleman. I really don't want to go look at conveyor belts and tell them what they need. I'm over there going, hold on, let me Google that.
Oh, wonderful. Well, that's kind of cool. And then, so you also do squatching. Talk a little
bit. I love squatching. And my husband will tell you that's not a real word. But he hates it with a passion. He tells me all the time, he's like, they don't exist, right? And I'm like, you can't prove that. And I've seen 2. And I'm like, you know what? We've been married for 30 some odd years and you don't believe me? He said, I just think you're mistaken about what you saw. But I've been doing
very diplomatic answer from a husband.
2013 actively.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
So how did you get into this? What got you into
it? I wish I knew. Honestly, I've always talked about Bigfoot. Back in probably 2012, my daughter called me one day and she said, Mom, you need to turn on Animal Planet. And I'm like, why? And she said, there's a show on here about Bigfoot. I'm like, okay, well, I flipped over and it was, Finding Bigfoot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, wow. And then I look at the end of the credits and I'm like, oh my gosh, people actually do this. They actually go out and look for it. So I got on their website and I called and I got accepted on an expedition. That was in Kentucky, my first one. And I was hook, line, and sinker from the get-go. The funny thing is I got there. At that time, I drove a Nissan Altima. I packed that car. I could have lived for a year out of the stuff that I packed for a weekend trip because I really had no idea. And I got there. They had told us where we were camping, and we were actually basing out of a state park. I got there. I had my campsite. I set up my tent, which I had to practice before I went. I had to practice because I'm like, I don't even know if I remember how to set up a tent. And I called my husband that day because I didn't see anybody else. I saw some other tents, and we weren't supposed to start till like 6:00, and it was around noon. And I called him. I said, what if I've made a mistake? And he said, what do you mean? I said, what if I'm here with a bunch of crazy people? That's literally what I said. And he said, you know what? You shouldn't have went. You need to pack up. Just come home. This is dangerous. We don't know who you're going to be with. You should come home. And I'm like, no, we spent really good money on this. And I'm not coming home. And he's like, you need to come home. And I'm like, give me one night. Let me stay here one night. And if they're crazy, I'll leave. Well, 6:00 came. And I think by 6:45, I was like, when is the next one? Because all of a sudden you were there with like-minded people, and they weren't crazy people. There were doctors and lawyers and financial advisors and everyday Joes. And I'm like, these people are just like me. My husband likes to joke that we're in a cult. We are not, but he likes to joke that we are. And I remember when I told my mother, who she passed in 2018, but I said, Mom, you're never going to guess where I'm going. And she's like, where are you going? And my mother, I don't look anything like her, but my mother was about 5 foot tall, little Filipino woman. And I mean, I got all my daddy's genetics, but, she's like, where are you going? Where are you going? And I said, I'm going on a Bigfoot hunt. I'm going on a Bigfoot expedition. And she said, well, I am not surprised. And I said, what do you mean you're not surprised? And she said, you don't remember? And at that point, I'm like, remember what, Mom? And she said, you used to get down on your hands and knees and pray, please, God, don't let the Bigfoots get me. And I'm like, what?
Wow.
She said, I can't believe you don't remember that. And I said, how old was I? She said, you were about 6 or 7. She said, and I don't know where it came from, but she said, you would pray. And she said, you wouldn't pray for anything else, but please, God, don't let the Bigfoots get me. And I said, Mother, what happened to me that you're not telling me?
Really?
Yeah, she said, I have no idea. I don't know where it came from. So as I got older, I did look up because I thought, you know what, maybe it was the $6 million man. Because, we used to watch that religiously. I said, maybe it was that Bigfoot episode. But that happened like 4 years after I used to pray that. So I don't know. Maybe I need hypnosis or something for something that I don't remember happened. But I don't know. Maybe I saw one when I was little. We lived out in the country. Right. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. Y'all have to forgive me. I am Southern to the core, and I forget that maybe you don't understand everything I'm saying.
Oh.
My country accent is bold.
So you went on this expedition for the first time, and what was that like for you?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. I mean, you got to, like I said, you got to meet like-minded people. We got to go on night hikes. We went on day hikes. We had people telling us about the history of Bigfoot and maybe what the anatomy was. And I really, really loved it. And even though it got cut short on that Saturday night, we got there on Thursday. And on that Saturday night, we had tornado warnings. Everybody was like, okay, we're leaving. Everybody pack up. There's tornado warnings coming this way. And me and another guy and a couple of other people chose to stay. And I'm like, well, I'm 5 hours from home. What am I going to do? Get in my car and run into it? So I stayed, and we sat there under the tent awning and talked during some terrible weather. But I don't know. I can't explain it. It just sunk into my soul, and I loved doing it. Right. I still love doing it.
Right. So that was kind of the start of this. So where did it lead you? So what has been some of your experience with this?
It led me to going on about 30 expeditions. Then I became an investigator for the BFRO in 2015, I believe. And then I had been to so many expeditions, and I'm not knocking the BFRO, and I'm not knocking other people, But when you go to a lot of them, you start finding things you like and things you don't like. And I became that person that said, I can do this and I can do this better. And in my previous life, I had been an event coordinator for a small city in Alabama. So I was used to having, okay, highway department, I need 100 garbage cans put out here and I need porta potties. And it was a whole lot different when you had to plan it without having all that support. But I took away some of the things I didn't like. And I made sure that I thought every time I planned one, that I thought of it as, what would I like to do on an expedition? How would I like to be treated? Would I like, as a new person, would I like to have specific time set around just for a new person going into the field? Because, I always say, if you like to hike, if you like to camp, what's not to like about hunting Bigfoot in there? You're hiking during the day, you're looking for signs. Hiking during the night is one of the most adrenaline rushing things you can do for me. Even when you get scared, and sometimes you get scared because you hear a coyote that's 100 yards from you. But hiking around in the woods with a red headlamp on, it doesn't get any better than that. No.
Yeah.
So no, but you still work with the BFRO, correct?
I do. I'm an investigator for Tennessee, and I do expeditions mostly in Tennessee and Georgia. Been trying to plan one for a while with Alabama, but there's a lot of that goes into expeditions and permit processing and having enough scouting to where you find an area that you think might have activity, or where there's been reported activities, not necessarily reported to the BFRO, because a lot of people will report something and say, I don't want this posted anywhere. I don't want you telling anybody. I'm just telling you. Well, it's hard to say, hey, we're going to go to this area that I promise you there's been Bigfoot activity, but I can't tell you about it. But mostly Tennessee. And Tennessee, if you're familiar with Tennessee and North Georgia at all, it's the Smoky Mountains, it's the Appalachians. It's very, very dense in areas. You could look 100 yards off a trail and not be able to see anything. Lots of rhododendron and lots of mountain laurel and just thick bush and lots of poison oak and poison ivy.
Right. We've talked about that, how many areas in the woods that have not really been explored.
People don't understand that. You could walk on a trail, and 100 yards off, there could be 5 Bigfoots. Not necessarily, you're not going to see them. Just like you don't see mountain lions. They're going to see you. You're not going to see most of the stuff. Just like snakes, as much as I hate them, typically they're going to go off the trail before you get to them. Doesn't mean they're not there. You just don't see them.
Yeah. Well, I thought that was interesting, when Maria was talking, and she said that about even being in the jungle and how the silverbacks could be right next to you and you would never know.
Yeah.
Right. If you want to be quiet in the woods, you're going to be quiet in the woods. And if Sasquatch are as elusive and intelligent as we think they are, they know when to be quiet. They know exactly when, just like deer's going to be quiet and not move if they're, and then they're going to bolt. But most animals or people that don't want to be found are not going to be found.
Exactly. So in this time, talk about your experience of actually seeing what, your husband says that
it's crazy.
What you saw, your mistaken identity. Talk about the mistaken identity.
Well, all right. The first time, and lots of things happen. We use audio, or I do, most people do that are in the research. We use audio. So you spend hours listening to audio, and sometimes you think you hear a howl, and then once you get it back on audio, it's like, that was a coyote, or that was a barred owl or something. But that's why you use audio, so that you can go back and research it. But in 2016, I was on an expedition, and 3 of us had kind of broke off. It was I think it was on the Friday night or something, but we kind of asked the host, we're like, hey, do we have to go with a group? Can we just go on our own? And he knew me well. And he's like, yeah, Lori, you know what you're doing. You're an investigator. You just, make sure I know where you're at. So we walked down this trail. And honestly, we were just tired. You don't get a whole lot of sleep. 3 hours, 4 hours most. And you've walked, and you're just, it's a lot. So we're walking down this trail and nothing's going on. And we're like, okay, why don't we just walk across to this other trail over here? We didn't radio the guy, which I should have, but we didn't radio him and tell him. We're just like, okay, we know where everybody else is. So we're just going to go on this trail. And as soon as we got on the trail, one of the guys, I was with two guys, and he said, man, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. And we kind of joked. We're like, good, maybe that means a Bigfoot's here. Because yes, you take it serious, but at the same time, you have to make fun of yourself. You have to be lighthearted about it. So we're like, oh yeah, we're going to see a Bigfoot. Well, we're walking, and we always carry those little tripod stools in our backpack, so that lots of times it's just about sitting and listening to what's going on in the forest around you. So we get to this point, and it made a sharp right-hand turn straight down. And there was a sign that said something like, I don't know, Soggy Bottom Trail, 1.8 miles. And we all looked at each other and were like, I don't want to walk anymore. I mean, that's the truth. We were like, I don't want to walk anymore. And I'm like, hey, why don't we just sit here? We'll just sit at this intersection. And I said, we'll all look different ways. I said, you look up that there was a ravine with a big mountain beside it. And then there was straight down that Soggy Bottom Trail. I don't even remember if it was called Soggy Bottom, but that's just in my head. And I said, and I'll turn and look the way we came. We're like, okay. So we all pop out our chairs. I popped my chair out, and we had audio going, and I turned around, and on the trail behind where we were walking from, something kind of came around the corner, and it's walking. And I looked, and I thought, which one of you guys walked back there? I thought maybe one of them went to pee or something. And I'm like, which one of you guys walked back there? And I turned around, and they're both behind me. And I'm like, who is that? What is that? Oh my God. Because then I realized that it was what I would call a juvenile, because it was only about 6 foot tall, according to the branch that we measured. And it's walking down the trail, and it just stops, and then it turns on a dime and runs straight down the ravine. And when it ran down the ravine, coyotes started going off. Acorns were falling off the trees, and you could see, it was a pretty bright moonlight. You could see all the little trees shaking, all the underbrush trees shaking. And I'm literally going, oh my God, I just saw a Bigfoot. And they're like, no, you didn't. But they're hearing all this other stuff going on. And on the other side of the trail, acorns were not falling. So it wasn't the wind. Mm-hmm. There was nothing going on. They're like, what did you see? And I said, it looked like somebody in a hoodie. Now, at the time, it didn't even dawn on me that that's how a lot of people describe a Bigfoot, mm-hmm. With kind of a conical shape. Right. And I'm like, it looked like somebody in a hoodie, but it had hair. Uh-huh. And so we start going over there, and we're looking, and the coyotes are still going off, and we go over there, and I'm like, it was right here. And this is the tree that it ran down beside, and you could see where the leaf litter, because this was in the fall, you could see where the leaf litter was all messed up. And I'm like, it's right at this branch. So we measured the branch, and it was like 6'1". And they're like, how big was it? And I'm like, wasn't real bulky, but I said, my first thought was it was a person, but then it wasn't a person. So, I mean, we're doing all this, and we're all excited for probably 25, 30 minutes. And then it dawned on me that I needed to call the guy on the radio and tell him what had gone on. Well, it turns out that they had connected to a trail, and they were at the end of that trail at 1.8 miles away. So they came up there, and they ran up there to see what was going on, and we measured everything. And again, all of it's on audio. Everything we said, curse words and all, were all on audio. We didn't have any video, because you're not really going to get video that quick. The people think, oh, why don't you? But you're not standing there with a camera or your phone recording every minute that you're out there. And then to further that, that was all exciting. To further that, the next day, we were still in that camp area, and these two hikers, a man and his son, came out of the woods. We were actually going to go and check it out during the daytime. And a man and his son came out of the woods, and he's like, hey, just want to let y'all know, he said, we just saw something back there. Be careful. And we're like, what did you see? And he wasn't with our group, so he had no idea what we were doing. He said, well, at first I thought it was a bear. He said, but it was up in the trees, and it was standing up and walking behind the trees like it was paralleling us. We're like, really? Okay, that's interesting. Well, that happened in 2016. In the 7 years since then, nobody knows where that spot is, but there have been, I think it's either 4 or 5 other reports of Bigfoot activity within 50 to 75 yards of where I saw that. Oh, so wow. I personally think that down that ravine, I mean, I think in that area is maybe a family zone for them, or they live in that area, and that's a frequently used area, because we never tell people exactly where something happened, so that you don't have that preconceived idea that, oh yeah, this is where it happened, I'm going to see something. Right. You don't really want that to happen. You want everything to be legit.
Absolutely.
That makes sense.
So my husband still says it was probably a bear, but I'm like, yeah, bears don't run. And he probably didn't like it because I think I called him at 2:00 in the morning and told him, and he didn't like me waking him up. But I'm like, you know what? If I called you at 2:00 in the morning, something big has happened. You know?
Right.
And he's probably thinking big for you, not so big for me.
Exactly. Exactly. And, my husband is in corporate America, and still to this day, people know what I do, and they some laugh, some just think it's exciting and they just want to hear my stuff. But we go to events and he'll be like, do not bring up Bigfoot. Don't bring up Bigfoot. And I'm like, I won't, and we're in evening attire, and he's like, I'm going to go to the bar, get us a drink. Don't bring up Bigfoot. I'm like, okay. Well, he comes back, and there's a group of people standing around me, and I'm talking about Bigfoot. And he's like, told you not to. And I said, I didn't. They asked me. I didn't bring it up. They came and asked me. So he hates it, but I just laugh at him.
I think there's a lot of people that are interested, so that makes sense to me.
Again, what's not to be interested about?
Right.
You cannot prove that they don't exist.
Right.
You can't. You cannot prove that. So why not have the belief that they could exist? And like I said, I've seen 2. So my second one was in 2018, and 2 other people other than me all saw it at the same time. And we were about 100 yards apart, and we saw it from different angles, did not tell each other. I mean, it wasn't like, hey, there's a Bigfoot right there. But we all came together and was like, hey, I need to tell y'all. And they're like, you saw something right there. I'm like, yeah, between the trees. And again, that was another pretty moonlit night, and we all 3 saw the same thing, and it was in stride. We had thought that something was paralleling us up on the hill most of the night, and we actually all drew almost the same exact picture, because that's what you try to get somebody to do. You don't have to be an artist, but just sketch what you saw. And we all drew almost exactly the same thing of it walking and being behind the trees.
Do you know approximately about how tall that one was?
That one was probably about 7.5 or 8 feet tall. It was much bigger. And the interesting thing that happened about this, and again, I'm past the point of caring if people believe, because it's not important. I know what happened to me. But, again, we're trying to recreate what happened, and we're all excited, not scared. We had no fear, but just excited that you go on a lot of these outings, you hike a lot, and the chance of you seeing something or hearing something are slim to none. So when something does happen, you're adrenaline rush, you're happy. Well, probably 30 minutes after that, we're like, okay, let's keep hiking. We know this happened right here. Let's keep hiking. And we're walking, and there's a lake down to our lower left, down a tall embankment. There's a mountain to our right, and we're on a trail. So we're walking, and we come up to this curve in the trail, and I just stopped, and I said, guys, we can't go any further. And they're like, what's wrong? Are you tired? Are you sick? Or, what? And I'm like, I can't explain it. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I said, something's talking to me. And they're like, what do you mean something's talking to you? And again, you're kind of laughing at each other. What do you mean, Lori? The voice is in your head. And I'm like, yeah, seriously, something is in my head. Something's talking to me, like mind speak. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I said, all I can hear is, please stop, please go away. That's all I could hear in my head. And I said, I have the feeling that they're saying, this is our home, you've already seen us, please go away. And that was the general. And I said, y'all do what you want, I'm not moving another step. And they all looked at me, and there were 5 of us. And the rest of them were guys, and they all looked at me and said, "You don't appear to be scared. If you're telling us that this is what you're hearing in your head, we're just going to trust you, and we're not going to go any further."
Nice.
And we turned around and left that trail. And the whole way down that trail, we heard something paralleling us on the hillside to our left, going back out of that trail. And I truly, to this day, I will say the same thing. I truly believe that they have some kind of telepathic abilities. Does that make it sound like it's an animal? No. I honestly can't tell you what a Sasquatch is. I mean, I know the BFRO says it's flesh and blood, and to some degree, I believe that. But if it's flesh and blood, it has abilities that most humans don't have.
When you go on the expeditions and that, do you find that most people that you take are pretty respectful and, not out there for a hunt,
Every once in a while, I mean, we interview them before we go to make sure that you're a good fit. I mean, you're going to get out there with 40 people. And again, that's at base camp. You're not 40 people in the woods. I mean, I take 5 to 7 on a trail, and we have multiple trails. The one we just went on week before last, the one we went on, I had 45 people, but I probably had 30 trails over thousands of acres. So we were never close to each other. We all split up. But every once in a while, you're going to get people that you didn't really get their personality on the phone before you accepted them. And they're like, "Well, I brought a gun." It's like, "No, you didn't." No, you didn't bring a gun because you're going to leave it in your vehicle, or they might not really believe. And I don't mind if they don't really believe. And I'm not there to make them believe. I'm just there to show them, look, this is a sign. I mean, what do you think this foot track is of? This is a 18-inch foot track. Where do you think it came from?
Have you collected a lot of evidence like that, or like the footprints?
I've got a couple of tracks. Mostly I've got audio.
Oh, nice. Cool.
But I've only collected and cast a couple of tracks that I thought were legit, without a doubt, tracks that couldn't have been anything else. I mean, one we collected, we were on a trail. It had rained a lot, and we were on it was trail, but it was an old roadbed. So it was real muddy, and we walked down there. Well, I wasn't in that group, but they walked down this trail. We're gone about 30 minutes and came back, and right in the middle of the trail are 2 giant tracks. Again, we're the only ones out there. And I know you're the only ones out there because drive in, park at a trailhead, but the road. You could hear the road.
Yeah.
What else where did those tracks come from in the middle of the trail after you'd already walked through?
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Those things you can't deny. I had something happen one time. We were getting ready for an expedition, and we had set up camp, and I have this propane stove that I use. It has legs, and I set it up on top of a stump, over the top of the stump, so that we wouldn't be tripping on the stump. Well, there was this beautiful creek, and we were like, "Hey, let's go walk down the creek." It was probably only 5 of us there at the time. Nobody else was supposed to arrive till the next day, and we were on top of a mountain. Again, you have to drive 5 miles up that mountain to get to this spot. There's no one else there. We walked down the creek looking for tracks or seeing if we can see anything. We come back, and I've got a picture of it somewhere. Between the leg of my stove and the stump that's covered in moss is a bundle of sticks wrapped with grass, like a long piece of grass, and it's tied, and it's in between my stove and the stump. Well, it was not there before. And we were like, "What is that?" It was like, and you're looking around going, "Where did this come from? There's nobody else up here. Where did this come from?" And then the next morning, we had 2 tents set up near the stove. We had 2 tents set up, and we got up. One of the guys got up, and there's a huge bundle of sticks right in front of his door on his tent. I mean, it's a big bundle of sticks, like big enough to make a fire out of. Well, they weren't there the night before. It was clear. And I don't know. I don't know how that happened. Where did those sticks come from? And it was a pile of sticks. It wasn't something that fell out of the tree. It was like somebody had collected little twigs, a bunch of little twigs and little sticks for a fire.
Wow.
So,
Well, I think you're right. I don't, there's so many people who believe in it. There's so many people who kind of don't know. And then there's those that think it's all your imagination.
right.
Or
Right. And I get it.
And I think the beauty of it is that you're seeing more and more about it, and people are talking more about it. And you're right. There are those people who say, I'll tell you this, but don't let it never release my name or whatever.
Well,
and I get it.
A few years ago, and maybe even still into right now, believing in Bigfoot was real kitschy. It was like, oh, that's a cool thing, and there's so many people that want to call in reports and stuff, and they'll say, hey, can Bobo come and investigate this? Or can you send Matt out? And it's like, that's not how it works. And so that those people, they're not legit. And you get tons of reports of people who want to be on TV or they want to meet one of these guys. And typically if somebody asks Matt, I start to think right away, it's like, okay, your story's not going to be true. Because, my factor comes in of, if you're asking me to send Bobo's not going to come out and look at a foot track across the country. Come on. It's like, just be for real.
Right.
I don't know. You just start that non-believing, and I'll never tell somebody I don't believe what they're saying. I will always listen to it and kind of store it in my head, even if it sounds fantastical. And I think there is no way that happened. If I ever hear it again, though, maybe I'll be like, oh my gosh, maybe that did happen. Because if I'm not there, how can I say something didn't happen to somebody?
Right.
That's the same way as somebody telling me something didn't happen to me. It's like, you weren't there. I promise you it happened. I can't tell somebody it didn't happen. I might not go investigate it, but I can't tell them it didn't happen because I don't know if it happened.
Yeah.
So, you said your husband does not believe, but you said you have a daughter. And then
I have a daughter that she thinks it's a little crazy too. Although she did go to a Bigfoot festival last weekend. And she's like, I have never in my life thought I would see so many Bigfoot people and Bigfoot merchandise. And I'm like, yeah, wasn't it cool? And the funny thing is she doesn't believe, but yet she bought her little boy some Bigfoot swim trunks. Awesome. Why would she do that?
Well, there's always that little bit of maybe.
Hey, I also believe in Nessie, so I believe Loch Ness does exist. We just haven't found it yet.
There's nothing wrong with an open mind.
No, there's nothing wrong with it. One day we're going to find it and say, oh my gosh, everybody wasn't lying. This is what there's really a creature that lives way down deep in those lochs.
Yeah.
And then your son. Let's talk about
well, and I have an older son. He actually goes to some festivals with me, and he kind of believes. I wouldn't say he doesn't believe, but the one child that would go with me and actually go Bigfoot hunting with me was my son Tanner, who died in 2019 of a drug overdose. And we would go places and he would have this little notebook. He'd count how many deer we saw, or he'd go on expeditions with me and he'd just be like, hey mom, this is kind of cool. But he was one of a kind.
So he believed a little bit more than your other kids.
Yes, he did. He believed a little bit more. And I think I could have brought him over to the dark side had he lived. I think he would have continued to go with me. And he was 22 when he died. I think he would have been like, yeah, I'll go and I'll help you do this stuff. And even though he was a little bit afraid of the dark, I think he would have enjoyed all the stuff I'm doing now.
That's really cool that you shared that interest with him. So out of that, you had a project that got started, right?
I did. Well, I started an Etsy shop called Bigfoot and Me. And I started going to festivals and selling these Bigfoot dolls. And this was prior to Tanner dying. And they're all different size Bigfoot dolls and all different colors. And after he died, I thought, I'm going to take my love of this and I'm going to do something to help people, because I didn't realize until he died how much help people needed. Even after I sent him to rehab, I thought, yeah, if you don't want to do drugs, you won't do drugs. If you want to stop, you can stop. I didn't understand the depth of the disease. And it is a disease. It's a medical and mental disease like any other thing. it's like a cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, I thought, what can I do? So I decided to make these dolls called Tanner Squatch. My son's name was Tanner. And I laugh sometimes because I feel like he's, I'm a Christian. I believe in heaven and hell. I believe he's in heaven, and I believe he's looking down going, seriously, Mom, you named a Bigfoot after me? Really? And I'm like, yeah, I did, babe. I'm like, everybody knows your name now. But I make these Tanner Squatches, and I'll show you one in a minute, and they have a heart on them. And every month, all the proceeds from the Tanner Squatches I send to a different rehab center. Now, I have about 8 or 9 in the rotation. So I just know, like, if this month is Teen Challenge, if I do $200, they get $200. If I only do $75, they only do $75. If I have 2 big events in a month, I'll swap them up. Like this month, I have 2 big events. So I'll swap up and do 2 different rehab facilities, and I'll give them the money. I mean, but sometimes it reaches into the thousands. Last year, I think it was almost $4,000 that was donated. And I don't take out any expenses for making them or anything. It's a very little amount that I give that might help somebody. It may help somebody else's mom or sister or brother or whatever from going through the heartache of that police officer coming to your door and telling you the most horrible thing you'll ever hear in your life. My son died in a hotel room in a Marriott with other people there. And do I really think I ever really want to know what happened? No, probably not. There is the one good thing that came out of it is that the drug dealer was arrested, and he's currently sitting in jail awaiting a trial date. Whether or not they'll cop a plea, I mean, it'll be 4 years in July that Tanner died, and he's been in jail 3.5 years.
Wow.
Well, he was out for a little while because he made his bail, but then he skipped bail and ran off to another state, and then he got arrested for the same thing, for selling fentanyl. He got extradited back to Tennessee, so this time he has no bail. Now, will they possibly cop a plea and not charge him with second-degree murder like he's in jail for right now? Possibly, but at least he's off the streets right now. He actually admitted, he said, I didn't sell it to him, I gave it to him. Well, it's the same thing.
That's not a really good defense.
Yeah, it's not. It's the same thing. Fentanyl is a deadly synthetic drug that we need to have better laws for. I mean, it should be murder, but that's neither here nor there. All I can do is my part to try to help the people who are fighting all sorts of abuse. You don't realize. Alcoholics don't realize they're alcoholics typically. And they all think that, okay, I drink a little, I can stop anytime, but you can't stop. And your body, once it reaches that dopamine level that you need to feel good, you just think, okay, well, I'll have one drink, or I'll just have one hit of this Coke, or whatever your vice is. Your body literally craves it and needs it. And I used to be one of those people that would look at drug addicts and think, how'd you get yourself in this position? And what are you doing? My son was only like that a little bit, and then he went to rehab. Most people would have never been able to know that he was a user. And at the time he died, I thought he was clean. I thought, no way. He's been good. He's 6 weeks clean. Again, do I want to know what happened? Probably not, because it's neither here nor there. Again, as a Christian, the only thing that gets me through is I have to believe that God gave him to me for a reason, and God took him for a reason.
Well, I think the thing that people don't understand is sometimes, when you have that loss, sometimes to help with that, when you do something like what you're doing with the Tanner Squatches, is such a healing process too. And, when we talked about this earlier, one of the things is it keeps Tanner relevant. I always tell people when I do grief and loss work, I always say, to me, the saddest thing is when somebody dies twice. And people say, well, what does that mean? I said, when their body dies, I said, that's hard enough on us. I said, but when we stop talking about them, when we let their memory and all that go away. I said, they've basically died twice to me,
I was in court. So, because I go to every court proceeding that this guy has. And I was in court about a month ago. I ended up talking to the district attorney. And he said, well, you don't have to come to some of these court proceedings. We'll let you know, because some of them are just standard. We have to bring them up and continue. And I said, if I'm not here to stand up for Tanner, no one is. And he said, no, ma'am, that's our job. And I said, you have no stake in it. I said, he wasn't your child. I said, the day that I stop coming, then there's no one here for Tanner. Mm-hmm. And he looked at me and he said, I've never thought of it that way. And I said, so I can sit here through court for 4 hours and I can cry, but at least I know that I am doing something to stand up for him. My husband and my other 2 kids don't talk about him a lot. They don't go to the cemetery. And it took me a while to say, okay, I get it. That's your grief process. My grief process is that I have to cry a little bit every day. I mean, it may just be a few tears, but every day there's going to be something, and I have to talk about him. And, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. They don't want to talk about your child that died. They don't want to see you cry. But it is so important. He meant something. He was a real person. He wasn't a statistic. He is a statistic, but he was more than that.
Well, he's the state statistic. He was your son.
That's right. That's right.
Once again, I think when you go and you do this, it brings awareness to a really critical issue that we have in the United States when it comes to addiction and stuff like that, and why we have to be more aware of it. And, what are some of the things that need to be done?
Well, the drugs coming across the border, everything. I think it was about a year and a half or 2 ago, there was a package from China that came into North Carolina through the mail service, and it was full of fentanyl, and it was enough to kill, I don't want to say a wrong amount, but it was enough to kill like everybody in 2 states. And it was just through the regular mail. And we don't have enough laws to crack down on how easily it is to do this. And just, the dealer that is responsible, and I do hold him responsible for Tanner's death. People are like, oh no, your son took the drug. Well, I don't know what happened. It doesn't matter. That dealer's still responsible.
Well, he was still distributing something that he didn't have a prescription for, and your prescription is for you and not to share with your friends.
But that dealer has a rap sheet that's 3 pages long, all of drug stuff, drug-related incidents. Why was he never, ever put in jail for anything? It was always 11 months, 29 days, suspended sentence, because we don't take it serious. And then, this guy finally killed somebody, and who knows, it might not be the first person that has ever died by drugs he gave them.
Absolutely. Well, we hope that everything turns out well for with the trial. And so here is
this is my Tanner Squatch. So they come in different sizes. I'll show you. Here's the little one. This is the most popular one, because even to help people, somebody's going to buy $20 more than they are $35. So, but I make different sizes, and I don't know if you can see, most of them, they have a little heart on them. Yeah. Pretty much they're all the same color, unless somebody specifically says, hey, I want a brown one. Can you put a heart on a brown one and still call it a Tanner Squatch? Certainly. I'll certainly do that. So, but most of them have bluish hazel eyes like my son, but I do make them with other color eyes.
So let me ask you this once again. Let's plug your Etsy store for.
It's called Bigfoot and Me.
And so anybody out there listening, Bigfoot and Me, you can go to the Etsy store and know when you purchase a Tanner Squatch, you called it Tanner's Heart as well.
Yes. Tanner's Heart, Tanner Squatch. I had a guy come up to me at a festival, a conference in Ohio one time. I was at my table, and this young kid came up. You could tell he was a football player, 16 or 17 years old. And he came up and he's like, oh my gosh. And he didn't read my little sign, because I have a little sign explaining what happened to Tanner. And he's like, oh my gosh. And he picked up and he's like, Mom, come here. And she came over. She said, well, he said, look, it's a Tanner Squatch. We've got to have it. Well, by then I'm getting teary eyed and I'm like, hey, I said, did you read the story? And he's like, no, what? So he read the little thing. And I said, so my son was Tanner. And I said, you play football? And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, well, what position do you play? Well, he played left center. Well, that's exactly what my son played. And I'm like, or left guard. And I'm like, oh, and I said, what number are you? He said, I'm number 67. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that was my son's number. So this 16, 17-year-old football player starts crying and he's like, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, this was meant to be. I was supposed to meet you and you were supposed to find, his name was Tanner. And I said, you were supposed to find this Tanner Squatch. I said, and maybe your mom will buy this for you. I'll give the money away. But I said, maybe you will go tell your friends how easy it is to go from pot to whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. I don't care what people say about, the gateway drug. It doesn't matter. Nowadays, fentanyl can be in any drug, in anything. But I was supposed to meet that guy that day. Absolutely. And I hope that he did go on and maybe tell other students his age, other people his age, gosh, don't do that. Don't get started on it because you don't know when you're not going to be able to stop.
And, I think that's the thing. And, it's such a wonderful cause. And, like I said, hopefully people will hear this and go to your Etsy store and realize that, when they buy Tanner Squatch, it's a good cause and the money gets to go to other people. And hopefully, raising that awareness, it starts with the awareness and then from the awareness comes more of the action and stuff. And, we are so grateful that you joined us today. Because, a lot of people understand when we do these stories and people will say, well, that's a Bigfoot story. But even the Bigfoot stories, there is a story behind that story that people don't understand.
I'm a firm believer in all things for a reason. Even when they're horrible things, I believe everything happens for a reason. And, maybe me being in Estes Park in the donut shop, maybe I was supposed to meet you guys because maybe my message of helping people will be carried further through you.
Absolutely.
And again, if it helps one person from living that life or from dying or from their family going through the trauma that it is. And it is a trauma. I mean, I've lost both my parents. That hurt. But there is nothing like losing your child. And I don't care if he was 22 years old. He is my child.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think the thing is that's what we always say, when we do this podcast, really is about, we always say if we have one person who listens and one of the messages we talk about, because it really is about being mentally strong, moving forward, then we're a success, and it's the same thing with you. We are so grateful that you joined us. It's such an amazing story, and also just that you continue to follow your passion of the Bigfooting. And I imagine even going out there and Bigfooting, there's still that little bit of connectedness to Tanner.
There are times that, I don't ever encourage people to walk on a path by themselves. There's just dangerous things out there. There's dangerous people out there. But every once in a while, I'm like, I'm going to walk 200 yards ahead when it's with me. And sometimes I'll talk to Tanner. I'm like, Tanner, if you're out here, you watch over me, watch over mama. And, and then I'll laugh and I'll say, help me find a Bigfoot, Tanner. It's what I'm here for. I mean, I do have a connection with him, and I have a connection more so in the forest now than I've ever had. It brings me a peace in my soul. And even when I'm feeling the most down, I can go sit in the forest and I feel better.
Outstanding. Wonderful. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank
you so much for listening. And we will be back next week. We hope that you guys have an amazing week.
Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.